Are you the parent of an Ontario student who's wondering why their kid got the marks they did? Or are you a student who's worried about grade inflation and wants to know how to talk to their teacher about their marks? Well, if you have any questions about grades in Ontario schools, I have answers for you in this video. Hi, my name is Greg Senishin. I own Asynchronous Academy, a Ministry of Education inspected online private high school, and I'm here to answer your questions about the Ontario school system. So the first place to look if you're ever wondering about anything to do with marks in Ontario is this document here called Growing Success. It's provided by the Ministry of Education and it tells teachers all sorts of things like what we should be assessing, how we should be assessing it, what types of things we should be looking for, all those types of things. So all the questions about grades really are answered in Growing Success. One of the first things we should talk about are the categories of knowledge and skills. Those are knowledge understanding, thinking inquiring, communication, and application. Knowledge and understanding is knowing the facts that are related to the topic of study. Thinking inquiring is being able to make a plan to extend that knowledge. Communication is being able to communicate the things that you have learned and investigated. And application is being able to take the prior three and turn them into a useful product that does something or tells someone something about the topic you're studying. The next thing we should probably talk about is levels. Levels more or less correspond to traditional letter grades where A, B, C, D have been replaced by 4, 3, 2, 1. But if you want to think about it in letter grades, that's an easy way to translate between the two. In Ontario, our level 3 means that you are basically achieving the curriculum expectations. So if all of our students are in level 3, everyone's happy. If you're in level 4, that means you're exceeding expectations. So what that looks like could be a variety of different things, but it means you're doing more than the curriculum expects. On the other side, there is level 2, where it means you are mostly there, but you have just a few things which you need to do to meet expectations. And level 1 means you are fairly far off of expectations, but not enough to not earn the credit. Now, if you're wondering how we arrive at different levels, you can look at your assignment sheet and you should have at least 3 things on that assignment sheet. One of those is learning goals, where you should be told what you're expected to get out of doing this assignment. The next is success criteria, which is how you should know if you have been successful at learning those things before you turn in your assignment. And the last is the rubric, which is typically a table where your teacher will check off one of the boxes to show how they feel that you have done on the assignment in each one of the success criteria. So everything that the student does, and maybe things that they don't even turn in necessarily, are considered assessments. In Ontario, we use 3 types of assessments. There are assessments as learning, assessments for learning, and assessments of learning. Assessments as learning is the first one we're going to look at. It is where students do some sort of self-assessment in order to consider the things that they need to learn or the gaps that they need to fill in order to meet the curriculum expectations. These are not supposed to count towards a mark. So teachers don't take them into account unless they demonstrate the student has learned something or knows something, and then you can take it to increase a mark. So it's always in students' best interest to do any of these types of assignments because they can never hurt you, but they can only ever help you. The next type of assignment is assessment for learning, and this is descriptive feedback essentially that teachers give to students. Before you mark students, it's only fair to give them a trial run at a type of assignment. So we're supposed to give students some sort of assessment where they get to try out the skills that they're going to do on the marked assignment, but they don't actually get a mark that counts towards their final grade because they get to have feedback to see where they need to improve before they have to actually submit something for marks. But how do we arrive at the levels? We use a process called triangulation, which predictably takes into account 3 things: observations, conversations, and products. Observations are things that we notice the students doing. Maybe they are aware of us noticing it, or maybe they aren't. Conversations are things that we talk about with the students, and products are the things that they turn in, like worksheets or assignments. In addition to assessing assignments, we also evaluate students' learning skills across the semester. The learning skills are responsibility, organization, independent work, collaboration, initiative, and self-regulation. One thing you might think is that those in a lot of ways are actually more important to students' long-term success than many of the things that they might learn in a class and then forget. One thing I would like to see as a teacher is those things actually have a bigger portion of our assessments than they do right now. Because I think that it is really important that, say, for example, students show up on time and turn things in on time and those types of skills, which are one of the things which have been lacking in Ontario schools, in my opinion, in the last little while. Learning skills can be incorporated into marks, but they shouldn't affect a student's overall level. So let's say at the end of the year, you have a student who has a 79 and their work skills have been very, very lacking. It would theoretically be okay to drop their mark from 79 to 71. On the other hand, if you had a student who got a 79 numerically, but their work skills were exceptional, it would not be okay to bump that kid up from 79 to 81 because that would cross a level threshold. One issue with learning skills being distinct from grades in this way occurs, I would say, with at least 1 or 2 students in every class, which is that there's a student who doesn't submit work through the majority of the semester, and then at the end tries to submit all of the work for the whole semester done to the minimum standard that they think would pass. This is permitted. In practice, what we have been instructed to do, in my experience, has been to have a submission window where you will accept late work, but then you have a drop dead date, it's been called, where it's just pass or fail. So that's one way to deal with it, which does something, but I think that having the ability for students to submit all the work right at the very end enables a lot of bad behaviors through the course, which is detrimental to a lot of students in class. So let's talk about the hot topic that is on the tips of everyone's fingers in /R/Ontario grade 12s, grade inflation. I do think grade inflation exists. I don't think it's as big a deal as many people are claiming. Let's talk about it. So, from my perspective as a teacher, the place it really got started was during the lockdowns. Obviously, switching to remote learning over the course of a few days was a big disruption for everyone, and there were going to be some negative outcomes to that. The ministry was in a position where either students could suffer the burden of those negative outcomes by having their grades drop if they, say, had to take care of their younger siblings or have whatever other types of issues, like internet connectivity issues, which would prevent them from accessing classes. That was one way they could go, which didn't seem like a great solution. So instead, what the ministry did was they instructed teachers not to lower students' marks from the point that they were before they went on break. So I think that was the better choice, but what that led to was students who were at home not being able to do work or choosing not to do work, realized that their marks weren't dropping, they told their friends, and a bunch of kids basically stopped working over the course of the lockdown. As a teacher, that put me in the position where I was giving students who are doing nothing average grades. That left me with some students who were actually working really hard and doing their best to do their work over the course of the lockdowns. So what felt right to me was to increase their grades a little bit over that average level, and that was their reward for doing the work on the lockdown when their friends weren't doing their work. The next year, those students who were doing the work tend to be from more engaged families, surprise, surprise, and parents would say, my kid was doing this level of work last year and getting this mark, why are they not getting the same mark this year? Having returned back to normal classes, things were reverting, but like we said earlier, teachers determine marks in Ontario, so depending on who was marking, a teacher may be more or less susceptible to parent pressure for a variety of reasons. If you're more established in your career and you've done more marking, you may have a stronger sense of what the marks are that you think are fair. If you're younger in your career, maybe you're not even a full-time teacher, you might be more susceptible to parent pressure because you don't want negative reports or any kind of drama around you. There's any number of reasons why a teacher might feel pressure to adjust a mark upwards particularly. Teachers would rarely adjust a mark downwards because if you think about it, if a kid gets a good mark, kid's happy. Principal's happy, parents are happy, you look like a good teacher. There's no reason to ever lower a kid's mark intentionally. So any of the pressure that would be felt would be to just raise kids' marks. So what does grade inflation really look like? Fortunately, the University of Waterloo has some pretty competitive programs, and they actually rank different schools in terms of how inflated their grades are, and they publish a list every year for admissions. These lists I got from the Ontario Grade 12 subreddit. I'm not personally sure of their validity, but these lists do exist and they are reported in major newspapers. So take these particular numbers with a grain of salt, but this type of thing does exist. So I grew up in Guelph. Let's take a look at a couple of Guelph schools which are geographically about a 10 or 15 minute walk away from each other. John F. Ross and GCVI. If we look at John F. Ross, where I went to high school, they have over 4 years, they have a 10% or so differential between a grade inflation number. If you look at GCVI, they have for 2 years a much higher number. What this looks like to me is that there's 1 or 2 teachers in the school who may have worked there for a short period of time, maybe 2 or 4 years, depending on the school, who had sort of higher marks. Maybe there were a couple of teachers, but you don't have turnover of a whole department in this kind of time frame, and the school standards don't generally change like that. So what it looks like to me is there are a few teachers who might be susceptible to parent pressure, who filter around the system and are increasing marks, but overall I don't think it's really a systemic thing. So where do we go from here? How can we make things better? Well, one of the first things I think we need to do is figure out what marks are really supposed to do. On one hand, marks can be used to categorize students so that we can hand them off to the next step in the educational process, and they're pre-sorted for universities. That is a fairly legitimate and commonly held belief of what we're doing with marks. On the other hand, we can also use them as a tool to encourage students to improve. Different kids respond to different things. Some kids might like a challenge, so if they get a low mark, they might respond to that by working extra hard. Other kids, if they get a low mark, they might feel crushed and stop trying. So getting the best result out of each individual person requires knowing what that person needs and trying to do your best to give it to them. That's one of the reasons that I think that letting teachers assess a final mark rather than having it be strictly by some other method is much better, because teachers, I do think, are really trying to do the best for kids in their classes. That being said, one place I think we can make a positive change is by rethinking how we do final grades. I think it's pretty evident that the people who do best in high school aren't necessarily the people who perform best in the world. So sorting people into percentage grades doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think that if we focus more on feedback like we give in levels, that really gives students more nuanced feedback about areas that they can improve and areas that they're strong. That discourages comparison between students, and I think is better for everyone's mental health, and gives students actually better feedback that they can use to improve their skills. What I would like to be available just to me personally as a teacher is some sort of annual test, not that dissimilar from EQAO, that would give me feedback about how my marking is relative to other teachers in the province. I think generally speaking, everyone would like consistent marking. It really just makes everyone's life easier. Teachers don't want to fight with people about their marks. We would rather just do the right thing and move on with our lives and go home and be with our families. So I think having as much guidance as possible about what kind of work meets what kind of standard is a really good idea. Do you have questions about the Ontario school system? If you do, let us know in the comments below, or get in touch through our website at asyncacademy.ca.